What do you know about politics? What should you know? Forget views, beliefs, and opinions. Politics is really a science, and that's where we come in. Welcome to Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Gordell.
I'm Todd Kent, and we're your guides to what's actually happening in politics. We're using our years of experience to navigate political data, media, money, behavior, and more to educate and inform you. Welcome to episode 10 of Inside Political Science. We thank you for being with us today and think we have a wonderful show and look forward to spending the time with you. I am Todd Kent. I'm a professor at Texas A&M University in the Department of Political Science within the Bush School. And Kirby is out today, and he'll be back with us next week. We have a wonderful guest today. He's actually one of my we went to our grad school together. This is Justin Vaughn, who's an associate professor at Coastal Carolina University. Justin is a scholar of the American presidency, and among other things. And what's interesting about Justin, we have the same background. We both have spent much of our time in academics, but we also spent a lot of time in elective politics. So we look forward to, I think Justin is perfect for our topics today. Also, Justin is the founder of the Presidential Greatness Project. And if we get time, and maybe we'll talk about more of that in the future, but you can certainly look that up. And everywhere I go, I read about people covering what they talk about as we compare presidents across time. So let's get into our quick takes. Justin, welcome to KAMU and Inside Political Science.
Todd, thanks for having me. It's great to be in Aggie land, if only virtually. But I'm excited to have our conversation today.
Well, what do is this the most unusual presidential kind of race that you remember in your lifetime?
I mean, certainly in my lifetime. And it's a candidate forever. It's wild. And, who knows? Hopefully the wildness has stopped, but you never know. There's a long time till November. More stuff could happen.
What's interesting to me is to see the kind of the change in the, I don't know, for no better word, the vibe going on out there in the campaign world. When Biden stepped down and Kamala Harris became the nominee, just how the tenor around the whole campaign changed.
Yeah, I think it really shows just how, I guess for lack of a better word, depressed the Democratic establishment and electorate were, with Biden as the top of the ticket, both in terms of, growing awareness of his own personal limitations, but also just kind of, a relatively unpopular administration that was hard to kind of get enthusiasm ginned up for a round two. And it totally switched when, he's replaced at the top of the ticket. And it allows the Democrats an effort to, instead of having to have a referendum on Biden round one election, they can kind of, even though Harris is the incumbent vice president, can kind of run as a change candidate.
So what's your take on the latest polls? We saw that, when a Trump-Biden race, Trump was doing well and pretty much everywhere he needed to. We see there's been a shift. Is this a real shift, or is this just a kind of a short-term move because of this new candidate?
I think it's both. I think that it is a shift, that replacing Biden with any leading Democratic candidate would have had a positive shift in the polls. That there are a number of people who are what I guess has been called fashionable to refer to as double haters, that didn't like Trump or Biden. Well, you take Biden out of that equation and you have an opportunity for, even if it's only 1%, 2%, 3% of voters to say, oh, I'm okay with this Harris person, or at least I don't know about this Harris person, as opposed to being, having their minds firmly made up. So on one hand, I think there is a real shift. On the other hand, I think we're seeing a momentum, phenomenon happening with Harris. And so, she's, gone up in several battleground polls over Trump. She's tightened the race, and even in the places where she hasn't. My guess is that a lot of that movement is real, and some of that movement is kind of a enthusiasm factor that'll wane over time.
So, I've been saying this over the last couple of weeks, is the fact that, we're in the summer, and in my experience working on campaigns and consulting with candidates, the summer was a difficult time to get anybody to pay attention. We just finished the Olympics. We got back to school. We got last minute vacations. We've got a lot of things going on. Is anybody really paying attention?
I think that is probably still true, right? That the people who don't pay attention to politics are not paying attention right now. I think that what has changed over the course of the last few decades is, staunchly polarized, immovable attitudes. So there's fewer people who tune in after Labor Day to kind of decide what they're going to think, that they probably already well know, at least with respect to President Trump, if they're on Team Trump or if they're not. And so even when those folks do turn in after Labor Day, there may not be as much movement as we might be used to seeing in the past. But I guess I was reading a thing just earlier this morning, and in terms of how quickly things can change after the summer, that John McCain was looking really good at the end of the summer. Al Gore was looking really good at the end of the summer, right? And obviously we never had a President Gore or a President McCain. And so things can change very quickly from where they are, when the kids go back to school.
Yeah. The one last kind of topic before we take a quick break. Last week we talked about this new vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota. Came in with people were excited about him. He seemed like a pleasant character, a positive message, and kind of had some stumblings over the course of the week. Do you see that? Is he going to be a problem for the Harris ticket, or is he in the end going to be what they needed?
I don't think he'll be a problem for the Harris ticket. I think that the stumbles that we've seen over the last, a few days with, questions about his military service and so on, those are probably just going to help people figure out what corners they were already headed to. I think that Walz is I look when they picked Walz, I was surprised. I think he's a low risk, low reward candidate. He's going to be steady. He's probably not going to make very many mistakes. There's probably not any more big skeletons that are going to come out. He's not going to get you a lot, but he's also not going to threaten to upstage the top of the ticket candidate. And on the day that he stands across the podium from JD Vance, he will probably acquit himself just fine. I think Vance is the candidate that is the biggest wild card, and Walz is probably, at the end of the day, when we tell the history of this election's outcome, Walz will probably not have a very big part in the story.
Great, thank you. Well, next we're going to take a deep dive into kind of campaign messaging. We're going to look at what's happening in the two campaigns right now and try to understand what is their strategy, what's their purpose in what they're doing. So when we come back from the break, we'll be chatting with Justin Vaughn.
The world doesn't stop turning at the weekend.
The conflict erupted between rival military factions.
So this weekend, catch up with the latest global events with NewsHour from the BBC, bringing you news, reports and analysis from around the world.
This was a natural disaster, but enabled by the failings of government.
NewsHour from the BBC.
Weekend afternoons at 3 on Aggie Land's Public Radio, KAMU FM.
Howdy, my name is Hannah Morris, and I am a student media producer at KAMU. You can now listen to audio stories created by students like me wherever you get your podcasts. Learn about Disaster City, an emergency rescue simulation facility located right here in College Station. Get a crash course on voting from local experts, and learn all about the importance of adoption from a local animal shelter. Visit tx.ag/student perspectives to learn more.
So this campaign is getting off to a start. Like we talked about, it's been summertime, but we're going to see the campaigns begin to kind of hone their message. What are you seeing out there in the campaign messaging from the two candidates?
Yeah, I think it's a tale of two very different scenarios. On one hand, we've got Donald Trump, who had a pretty Trumpian campaign message before when it was him versus Biden. It was very aggressive. Some would say negative. Some would say, I've seen phrase doom and gloom. It was, really beating up on the Biden administration's performance, particularly on issues where American public was most dissatisfied with the Biden administration's leadership. An inherently negative kind of conflict-oriented campaign. And then Biden drops out, and while the Biden-Harris administration's record is still kind of up for debate, the attacks on Joe Biden, on Joe Biden's capacity, are no longer relevant, right? And so now the Trump campaign seems to be at this point floundering a little bit in terms of finding what their message is going to be going forward, right? In many ways, their positive message doesn't have to change, but Donald Trump's not really keen on positive campaigning, right? And they're trying to find their way, I think, to an attack message that is effective on Harris and that doesn't, cause more trouble than benefit. And so eventually, and maybe they've already found it, but eventually, the pollsters and the strategists and the focus group organizers, they'll figure out the right combination. But the biggest trick, and it's always been the trick with Donald Trump, the candidate, is getting Trump to execute the strategy. He's a remarkable performer, but he talks about what he wants to talk about. And if he wants to talk about who he's mad at, if he wants to make personal attacks rather than focus on the stuff that the polling and messaging gurus are showed would work, then he'll do that. And so the Trump campaign is kind of in a pivot right now to both figure out what the new message is and also get Trump, I think, on board to execute that message and not just kind of what he feels like saying.
Why do
the
you
Harris
think?
campaign.
I'm sorry.
No, please.
No, I was going to say, why do you think that the Trump campaign didn't anticipate that this change was going to happen and already have a message ready? And it seemed like they were caught flat-footed, even though we all knew that there was probably going to be a change in candidates.
Yeah, it really does. And I'm a little surprised they didn't kind of have a backup plan already ready to go. But then again, at a certain point, particularly by June, it seems highly unlikely the Democrats are going to be changing their candidate, right? And so I think it also I think it's less of a big deal or less significant that Trump didn't have a backup plan than the fact that this historically unprecedented, late in the game change from Biden to Harris caught America flat-footed, right? And took a lot of effort. Biden went down swinging, right? It took the effort of just about every Democratic establishment leader to finally force him out, and it was certainly not of his own accord. And so, forcing a president to not run for re-election despite his own wishes is a pretty hard thing to pull off. And the Trump team may have just thought it was unlikely it was ever going to happen.
Maybe so. You were going to say something about the Harris campaign?
Yeah, so the Harris campaign, I think, is in a very different situation than the Trump campaign. On one hand, I think Biden as a candidate was also prepared to run a doom and gloom campaign, right? And it was going to be, Trump's too dangerous for democracy. Let's remind you about how bad things were with Trump. And part of that was because people were so dissatisfied with the Biden administration's performance that it was really hard, other than to its base, for the Biden campaign to put forward a kind of positive spin on what they've been up to over the last few years. That would play with, median voter who's, broke because of inflation and tired of wars and concerned about crime and immigration and so on. But when Biden stops being the top of the ticket, a lot of things change for the Democrats, right? Opportunity to, even though Kamala Harris is part of the Biden administration, opportunity to run Harris as her own candidate as opposed to just a continuation of the Biden administration, an opportunity to, really put the candidate herself front and center. Joe Biden was not going to be doing very much traveling. He was not going to be doing very much live speaking. He wasn't going to be the face of anything. And so that fundamentally changed with Harris, who can now run a modern campaign as a candidate, in a way that President Biden wasn't going to be able to do. But it also, I think we're starting to see the campaign shift messages, not just from focusing on Donald Trump's too dangerous to democracy to vote for, but to finding new positive messages. And those positive messages are much more potent with potential voters than some of the negative messages that the Biden campaign had invested in. So we're seeing even though for most part, the campaign structure has stayed the same when it went from the Biden campaign to the Harris campaign. We're seeing like a slow shift in terms of focus and style and tactics under Harris, and also a heck of a lot more money to play with to do a lot of these things that they probably weren't going to be able to do under Biden.
We see there's discussions that Harris hasn't done news conferences or got in front of the press, and maybe she's running a basement campaign like Biden did in 2020. We also see Trump, kind of like you mentioned earlier, stumbling a little bit. Do you think that the people, when everybody knows Trump, in fact, people get tired of hearing about him because they know him so well. Do you think that the people know Kamala Harris now enough to have a fully, solid opinion of her, or do you think that's still yet to come?
Oh, yeah, I think that's still yet to come. One of the things that's interesting, I was just looking at her numbers compared to Trump's. Her image numbers, so how much do you like this person? It's different than like job performance numbers. Her image numbers her positive image numbers the same as Donald Trump's. I think they're both at like 43%. So she's liked by about the same size of the American population. But there's nobody who doesn't know how they feel about Donald Trump, right? But there's, it's less than 10%, but there's a meaningful percentage of people who just don't know about Kamala Harris. And those folks who are least likely to know are those independent, lower information voters who are simultaneously the most malleable in terms of moving their attitudes and also the least reliable in terms of showing up on election day. But I think that there is a race to define Kamala Harris, and that the Trump campaign is not doing a great job in that. They're trying to figure out how to define her. Sometimes they're too liberal, sometimes it's personal attacks, sometimes it's borderline racial comments, and so they're kind of squandering the opportunity to define her negatively. And I don't know, I wouldn't say necessarily that Kamala Harris's team is doing an outstanding job of defining her positively either, but they're slowly, I think, her numbers, that undecided number has decreased in the last couple of weeks, and her favorable number has increased in the last couple of weeks. So they're slowly getting her to be kind of better known and better liked. But the idea that she's going to be an Obama-like character or candidate, where dramatically popular personally, that's not going to be the case. Her numbers are going to be much more like President Trump's or even Hillary Clinton's than Barack Obama's.
It seems to me that there's an opportunity in this campaign, especially for the Republicans. The number one issue in America is inflation. And it's the number one issue among Democrats and Republicans. The second biggest issue, if you look in totals, is immigration. And these are areas where you would think that the Republicans would have an advantage, but they don't seem to be able to. Well, and I say they, I mean, Donald Trump doesn't seem to be able to be disciplined enough to deliver that message over and over enough times to win the day, when really those should be very strong issues for them.
Yeah, the Republicans couldn't have dreamed up a better message environment for this election. The issues that Americans care about, they have a they have a strong advantage over the Democratic Party. Also, those issues are the ones that the Americans are least supportive of the Biden administration's performance, right? So whether it's inflation or it's immigration, it's tailor-made for Donald Trump and all of his surrogates to say, here's what I'm going to do about immigration, and it's broadly popular with most Americans. Here's what the Biden administration's been doing on immigration, and it's broadly unpopular with most Americans. And here's what's going to happen if you put Kamala Harris in office, and it's going to be broadly unpopular, right? And so if you could just nail that message, right? Trump has the great fortune in this situation of having his positions align with the median voter on the most important issues. But he just hasn't been disciplined enough to take advantage of that. And instead he keeps gravitating towards the things that play the worst. There was some interesting surveys have been released recently by, not neutral sources, but there's a kind of a high-tech polling operation that's funded by the longtime CEO of Netflix, and he put out a study of showing Trump's best attacks. And the best things that he can do are attacking the Harris by tying her to the Biden administration on immigration and on inflation. But the worst things he can do is talk about her personally or talk about her being too liberal or whatever, right? But he's gravitating towards those issues that only really resonate with 20 or 30% of potential voters, and he's not really focused on those issues like immigration or inflation, where he could move 60-70% of voters. Harris, on the other hand, has been running. Harris seems like she's listening to her pollster, right? That the pollster comes back and says, here, we tested 50 positive messages. We tested 50 about you. We tested 50 negative messages about Trump. These are the ones that work. These are the ones that don't work. And she's going with the ones that work. Very upbeat, positive positions on, kind of bread and butter Democratic public policy issues like Medicaid, healthcare, Interestingly enough, the issues, and probably not surprising, the messages that the Twitterati like, that the extremely online Democrats and extremely online Republicans like, they're never the messages that regular voters like. And so if you go on Twitter right now and look at what the Democrats are loving, they're loving Tim Walz calling Donald Trump and JD Vance weirdos, right? But most voters, they don't like that message, right? What they like hearing is, here's what Kamala Harris is going to do for healthcare if she's elected. Here's what Kamala Harris is going to do for the cost of living if she's elected, right? And that's largely where the campaign has been.
So during the Olympics, I watched way too much of the Olympics, but the Harris campaign ran ads here in Texas for 2 straight weeks. And the basic message was kind of income levels. She's going to improve your income so that you don't have to work 2 jobs, and abortion, and make sure there's access to abortion. And I tried to, I don't know, but I was trying to wonder if that was as a message for Texas, or is that a kind of a nationwide message? And if so, it seems like she's really talking to her base.
Yeah, and so first of all, I think it's weird that she's spending money in Texas, right? That's not a rational campaign expenditure, although they've raised a ton of money and they got plenty to spend. And so maybe there's secondary goals, right? Like driving people to donate more, or just increasing, her performance in national polls, which don't mean anything at the end of the day, but are still good news cycles. But a pair of very successful political scientists, Josh Calla from Yale and David Brookman from UC Berkeley, released a study not long ago where they had worked with a Democratic consulting firm to test a bunch of potential Harris messages. And what they found was that among the worst messages that Harris could put out was attacking Trump on abortion. Now, but we're still seeing that, right? And that's because the Democratic base really likes that message, right? And so in some ways, the ads that, especially on these kind of limitless advertising budgets that some of these presidential campaigns have. The ads that they don't always just put out the ads that are going to work for the undecided independents, right? They'll also put out ads, even if they don't resonate with everybody, because they also have to keep the donor class excited. They've got to keep the activists excited. And I think there's probably a lot of strategists out there that say, I don't care what the polls say, abortion is an opportunity for us because so many people are unhappy with the Supreme Court did. And even so many Republicans have what we would say to be moderate positions on abortion right now.
Yeah, it is interesting when you look at most important problem polls and even the questions that ask, what about you personally? Abortion is very low. So even though people may care about it, they care about it less than other things. And so it is interesting to me because the Harris campaign, I guess probably their most solid voter is the single female, and so it is interesting. It would be interesting to know really what the strategy is there by mentioning abortion. And it could be that you talk about those issues. You don't have to talk about some of the ones that are harder to talk about. Let's discuss that for a minute. If you look at we talk about policy issues and policy stances in the campaign. Right now, up to this point, we haven't heard much. We've heard from either the Trump campaign or the Harris campaign stuff like, what is your plan for inflation? What are you going to do about the border? What about crime? Talk about some of these kind of bedrock issues. We don't see a lot of specifics coming out of the campaigns.
Yeah, I think that's in general the case that they would rather not be, tied to anything they don't have to be. I think that a lot of the voters who are still undecided are not policy voters, right? They're I guess maybe they are students these days. We call them like vibe voters, right? That they're about how they feel about the candidate, the persona, and that they're not going to be making kind of complicated decisions about, well, this candidate's better on this issue versus this other issue, right? And so I think that there's a strategic imperative to stay general and to stay and kind of communicate in valence terms. There's also, I think, right now, Kamala Harris is surfing a wave of enthusiasm, including among the mainstream media. And so you would just ride that wave as long as you can take it. And the day that you found yourself having to do interviews about policy details means that wave is probably crested. And so she'll have to do it after the convention's over, probably. But until then, the more you can kind of have the broad-based uplifting valence messages, the better. And you don't have to worry about kind of nitpicking about policy issues or alienating people who are in your coalition because you decided to underemphasize a thing that they care about.
So how important do you see, if you watch the financial networks, there's talk of maybe we have slowdown in the fall, unemployment maybe going up slightly. There being kind of a move towards a recession, maybe not, but how important do you think that is for the candidates? I guess it seems to me that it's a bigger deal for the Harris campaign than maybe the Trump campaign.
Yeah, I think a slowdown in the fall helps Trump, right? Just increasing the pressure on the Harris campaign. This idea we got to get Biden out of there and take Harris with him, right? Harris is probably slightly less vulnerable to that than Biden would have been because she could distance herself if she wanted to, right? They have a really interesting needle to thread, though, in that on one hand, I think most scholars of the presidency know Harris was not a terribly involved vice president. Her and Biden did not seem to have a particularly close relationship. She wasn't a Dick Cheney or even an Al Gore, right, in the White House. But now that she's the top of the ticket, some of that history is kind of being revised, right? Trying to make her appear as if she was a more robust policy partner for President Biden. But it's tough to do that and then simultaneously not also take the heat for the economic issues that, your kind of average independent or moderate voter has a bone to pick with on the Biden administration. And so she may not get tagged with it as much as Biden would if he was the candidate, but I think it's still hard for her to dodge all the blame, of a Biden-Harris administration, just because her name comes second.
So, what do you expect the Republicans to do to try to change the direction of the conversation away from the happiness, the positive message of the Harris campaign?
Yeah, I think you're going to see the Republicans try to present the Democrats as ideological liberals, right? Probably try to, and I wouldn't call probably Harris or Walz progressives, but try to align them with the AOCs of the world, and make them seem out of step with moderate voters. And I think you'll also see the campaign, and to the extent to which Trump himself does it is an open question, but see the campaign and their advertising and in their broad messaging, try to focus on those two or three issues which happen to be the top two or three issues where the Trump campaign's position is stronger than the Harris campaign's position, and the performance of the Biden administration hasn't been viewed as terribly successful, right? So managing inflation, managing immigration, crime, probably, and if they can execute that, if they can execute the idea of making Harris Walz appear to be too liberal, and also clearly communicate that on the issues you care about, what Trump will do has been better than what Harris Biden has done, then I think that there can be a comeback in this campaign for Trump. If they can't, then not only will we see Harris taking the top of the ticket be better off for congressional Democrats than if Biden had been at the top of the ticket, but stranger things happen, and you may see a President Harris. I still am not ready to look at the polls and say, oh yeah, Kamala has this in the bag. But she's up now, and a lot of people didn't see Bill Clinton winning in 1992 at this point in the year, and he did. So, historic surprises take place.
On episode 1 of Inside Political Science, we talked about polling and how we misunderstand it as a public, not understanding the margin of error. I looked today in kind of the Real Clear Politics polls, and it seemed to me like most everything was in the margin of error. And a lot of the polls right now are surveying registered voters and not likely voters, and there just seems a lot of confusion out there when it comes to polls. So. Are we to ignore the polls right now, or is it time to get back in and look at them and try to get some insight?
I think that the way that the media often uses polls is not a bad way of using it, but it's the least useful way of using a poll as a thermometer to indicate exactly where something is. And so then you find situations where, and we saw this with the Clinton-Trump campaign, people were beating up the polls for not being good anymore because they were off by half a point. Well, that's not the real reason that people use polls at a high level, and not just political strategy, but corporate strategy or any kind of public affairs work, is not to get an exact reading on public opinion to the 10th of the percent, right? It's to figure out where things are broadly and what factors move them in the direction you want them to go. And in that case, polling is as good or better than it's ever been. But we don't usually see that kind of stuff released, and we don't usually see it covered in a way. Instead, we kind of see that horse race campaign coverage of, like we've seen with the Harris movement from when she first became the presumptive candidate, slightly trailing Donald Trump to now ahead of him by a couple points. Well, all of that movement, which most journalists make an extraordinarily big deal about, all of that movement's in the margin of error, right? Also in polls that have traditionally under-recognized or been able to under-capture key components of the kind of MAGA coalition, right? So if I'm Donald Trump and I see a poll that has me down 1, I'm not too upset, because that means I'm probably tied or even winning. But when somebody moves from down by half a point to up by 1.5, that's still only a 2-point shift, right? You're still well within the margin of error. And the point isn't even then like who's winning today. The point of these polls and why presidential campaigns will spend tens of millions of dollars on polling is to figure out not where the numbers are right this moment, but how do we get them where we want them to be? And a combination of how do certain kinds of people react to certain kinds of information when we give it to them in certain kinds of ways.
Seems to me like if you look at the polls, a lot of it is people coming home. They were expressing dissatisfaction with maybe Biden on the top of the ticket, and now they're kind of coming home. They were there anyway, and now we're just capturing them. So this fact that the polls are almost totally even, it should not surprise us. We've had two very close elections in the last two. So in our time remaining, let me ask you a question. What are you looking for over the next 2 to 4 weeks in the campaign to kind of help you to understand what's going on?
I'm looking to see if the Trump campaign can kind of get it together, right? They're floundering, they're flailing a little bit. Trump seems like maybe he is personally a little bit. Can they calm down? Can they get back to that moment of confidence they had prior to Biden dropping out, and pivot to a new discipline, to a new message, and be disciplined about it? Whether that happens is a huge question mark. But I'm looking to see if not just the Trump, the individual, but also the campaign itself can get there. And I'm also looking to see, if the various kind of spokespeople and surrogates in the Republican Party fall in line, or if they will occasionally use harmful rhetoric, a rhetoric that is actually kind of counterproductive to the Republicans' prospects. For the Democrats, I'm interested. I think so far, Kamala Harris has been very risk averse, and she's been very kind of cautious. I'm interested, and I don't think she can do that all the way through November, right? Sooner or later, she's got to do interviews. Sooner or later, she's got to do press conferences. Sooner or later, she's got to put out, key details and break with Biden on things. Sooner or later, there'll be something the Biden presidency does, a decision they make that may not be popular, that Harris will have to take a position on. And so I'm really interested to see at what point does the Harris campaign stop playing it safe, whether out of their own choosing or because they're forced to, and how does that go? Harris was not a strong candidate when she ran for president in the primary in 2020. A lot of a lot of unforced errors, a lot of campaign staff turnover, a lot of turmoil. None of that stuff has happened yet, but when the honeymoon's over and you're having hard days, how does the campaign react, and then how does the broader media environment react to that? Is it kid gloves, or is it kind of is it tough and critical commentary like we saw about Biden in those kind of final weeks of Biden's candidacy?
One last question. Are there still voters out there that we used to call them undecided voters, as middle of the road voters? We know that you said earlier, they're low information. They don't really follow politics that well. It's not that they've studied the candidates really hard and they don't know what to do. They just don't care that much. And so do you see, is there potential for somebody to capture this group, or is it going to be really close to the end and we'll see who can get out their vote?
I don't think there is potential. I think Donald Trump and Barack Obama were both very special candidates in different ways, and that they captured some of those undecided voters in respective kind of parts of the electorate. But even then, they didn't capture all of them. There's still a lot of them that still don't care about politics, right? Or they may have a Trump flag on their house, but not vote, right? Or they may have a Barack Obama T-shirt, but not vote, right? And so, but Kamala Harris is not Barack Obama, and Donald Trump already reached those people, in 2016. So I don't think that there is anything this year that's going to kind of galvanize a particular group that would otherwise be, unengaged. And there's probably a lot more just with rising disgust about politics and disinterest in politics and apathy about kind of civic matters that could have, not the 0 of 4 or 1 of 4 voters, but even the 2 of 4 voters just say, forget it. I'm not looking. There's a little window, I think, where, we would see surveys when it was still Biden, Trump, 60% of Americans don't like either choice or whatever, right? We're not seeing those things right now. But if the Trump campaign ultimately is able to negatively define Harris, we may start seeing that same kind of stuff again in October, at which point it's probably more likely that some people who vote half the time stay home than it is voters who never vote all of a sudden get excited to show up.
So, well, Justin, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight. It's great to see you again. And
yeah, you too.
That's episode 10 of Inside Political Science. And thank you for joining us. We appreciate it so much, your insight. And I expect us to get back with you soon. So we'll see you next time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Inside Political Science is a production from KAMU, Aggieland's Public Television and Radio. For more information, visit tx.ag/Inside Political Science. Have a question for our experts? Email them at insidepolici@tamu.edu. Also, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss a new episode.